Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Open Hour. Today, my guest is Dr. Sandeep Shastri, a vice chancellor of two universities. He was the vice chancellor of Jagran Lakecity University, Bhopal, and the pro vice chancellor of Jain University. He was also the faculty of the Department of Political Science from Bangalore University. He's also one of the country's most sought after political scientists, distinguished himself in the field of research and, of course, in his specific field of study, that is political science. Dr. Sandeep Shastri, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Jain. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a great, great honor to interview you and to go ahead. To start off, sir, did you choose to become a teacher or did it evolve in yourself naturally?
I don't think I made a conscious choice that sitting down one day and say, okay, I'm going to become a teacher. I think it was something which was inherently in me, to the passion for research, the passion for teaching. And when I was a postgraduate student, there was a challenge in the institution I did my undergraduation in. They suddenly fell short of teachers. And my principal there asked me, will you take undergraduate classes when you are free from your postgraduate classes? I said, yes. So even as I was doing my post-graduation, I was teaching first-year undergrad students. And I found that very fascinating. I found that very interesting. I found that very exciting. And the natural progression into a formal teaching and research role then happened. So I think it was the passion that made me go in the direction of teaching and research.
Yeah, but of course, that particular decision for you to march into the graduate classroom and take, probably that changed your life, that changed the lives of many, including me. So that's something great, sir. So research has played a very central role in your work. So it's played a pivotal role in your work. How does that captivate you? How does that impact you?
See, as a undergraduate and postgraduate student, I was intrigued by a range of political developments, both within the country and internationally. And I kept asking myself the why question about all those developments. And as you would also know, Jain, research is about asking the why question. And during my undergraduate and postgraduate days also, when I was asking myself that why question, I often found that when I dug a little deeper into the subject, I was able to understand that subject much better. And therefore, I realized that unless one really does a deep dive into a subject, your confidence levels about that subject will not be very high. It will largely be surface level. And when I decided that I want to make a career in the field of teaching / learning, I realized that without pursuing research, I would not be able to make a meaningful intervention in teaching learning. Because I'm one of those who believes that somebody who is a facilitator is also required to be a researcher, because your research output becomes something that you use in your classroom. The inquisitiveness of the learners in your classroom is something you use to pursue your research question. So in that way, they are mutually complementary.
The hundreds of research questions which you have helped to formulate have today become thesis and, of course, have become specialized fields of study, which is, of course, a great, great thing, sir, in the field of education. So now what I wanted to ask you is, you specialize in political science, sir. Why is it so? What actually captivated you to the subject of political science? Because you have branched into psephology also. You closely monitor and study elections, both the state elections and the central elections, in India and abroad. What is that one thing which captivates you to your subject?
Jain, I belong to that last batch of students who had to decide in their ninth grade whether we want to go to art, science, or commerce. And I took that decision with family support in my ninth grade that I will go into arts consciously. And my subjects then were history, civics, and economics, which I pursued for my ninth, 10th, and 11th. Mine was the last batch of students who completed their school education with 11th and went straight to college. After that, the 12th became a mandatory requirement. So once I completed my 11th and entered college, I continued with the same optional subjects, history, economics, and now political science. And I did that for 3 years of my BA. And among these three subjects, political science seemed to interest me much more. And I think a lot of that has to do with my school life also, because I was in a school where they did not have a student association, but they had what was called a school parliament. And every class had its representatives in the school parliament. And I remember for the 4 years, 8th standard, 9th standard, 10th standard, 11th standard, in my 8th standard, I was chosen the leader of the opposition. 9th standard, I became the prime minister. 10th standard, I went back to becoming leader of the opposition. And my final year, 11th, I once again became the prime minister. So that whole environment of leading your classmates, the whole environment of responding to what the opposition says, the whole environment of working with the cabinet. Now that I found very interesting. And somewhere I think it has impacted when I went into college to focus on political science. And when it came to my master's choice, I got admission to both history and political science. In fact, I got first admission to history and then to political science. But I decided not to take my history admission and wait for the political science admission. And when that came, there was no turning back and going forward. And once I did my master's in political science, I found the subject very passionate and interesting. And those days, the person who completed and got the first rank, the gold medal in the subject, was automatically offered a teaching job in the department. So at 22, in 1982, within a month of my completing my master's, my head of the department told me, would you like to join the department first as a research scholar? And 2 years later, I became a lecturer in the same department. And so I started teaching right in 1982. And my first batch of students I taught was actually those who were 1 year junior to me in my master's program. And slowly, I also realized it's important to pursue research. So within 6 months of becoming a research scholar and lecturer, Karnataka saw an election in January 1983. And that was an interesting election because many people thought that election would see the first defeat of the Congress party in Karnataka. And some of us in the department, some seniors and two of us who joined together, we decided to do a survey around the Karnataka elections. And we published that later as a monograph. So there started my interest in looking at elections and and even in elections, looking at popular perceptions of elections. I wanted to look at why do people vote in the way they vote. Election results are anyway known to us when the Election Commission announces the results. Now, I was more keen on the question, why do people vote the way they vote? Why do parties win and why do parties lose? And therefore, I got interested into doing survey-based study of electoral outcomes.
So your analysis never goes wrong. And you mentioned that you were the prime minister, in school. Have you ever thought whether you wanted to enter politics with your rich expertise and experience? Have you ever thought of it? And the changes that you can bring in?
Now, You have asked two questions actually. First, how our analysis of electoral trends have normally been on track. Let me mention this, Jain. As an academic looking at elections, I'm not interested in forecasting which party will win how many seats, because that anyway you get to know on counting day. Our interest is much more in explaining a particular verdict. If the NDA or the BJP stopped at 240 last time, what contributed to this decline from 303 to 240? Now that question. What led to the Congress stopping in double digits at 99 and not going beyond? Now, answering that question would require a survey. So therefore, we try to understand the pulse of the people. And in reading the pulse of the people, and that to a very dynamic India, I remember once the anchor in an election show asked me as the results came trickling in, Professor Shastri, who is the hero of this election? And the anchor expected me to take the name of a leading politician who was going to win the election and whose party was going to win the election. I said, the hero of every election for me is the Indian voter. You see, because the Indian voters' sagacity and wisdom is something very difficult to understand. On the same point, I will make another thing. In the last, 43 years now that I have been part of the teaching, learning, and research process, in these 43 years, I'm losing count now of that, more than 20,000 students, including you, have allowed me to learn with them in their classroom. I don't think I have taught anybody, but all these 20,000 young boys and girls, including you, have given me a chance to learn with them in their classroom. And if there is any success that has been achieved in being able to make right projections, I would give the credit to all those who have learned with me in my classroom. Now, coming to your second question. I think there are two different ball games. Being a researcher looking at elections and being somebody who enters active politics, I think involves two different approaches, two different mindsets, two different ways of thinking, two different styles of working. And I personally think I'm not cut out for that second role of getting into active politics. I felt it's more important to be somebody behind the scenes who provides input, provides information, provides advice to people who seek that advice. So therefore, I have people approaching me across the political spectrum. Somebody like you who was my student once read my article and said, it is a great article. I said, thank you. And then she had a second question. She said, sir, while I enjoyed your article, I have one problem. I said, what's that? I can't make out which political party you support. I said, that is then my job being done rightly. If I can write in an unbiased way based upon the data that I have before me, and I don't seem to be biased in my writings or my reflections, that for me is the sign of an academic researcher. So I like to maintain that independence. I like to protect that independence. I like to have that space which allows me to reflect on what is going on. And therefore, I have people across the political spectrum who come to me for advice. And maybe that's a better role to play than be part of a particular political party or process.
Okay, sir. Having led two universities, you were the pro vice chancellor in Jain University and the vice chancellor in Jagran Lakecity University. What were the academic challenges which you saw, and what are the challenges which you see in a rapidly changing environment in India today?
Jain, I would believe a challenge is a byproduct of an opportunity. When you seek out an opportunity, when you seek out a change, when you seek a process of moving forward from where you are, it every opportunity brings with it challenges. See, you recognize the fact of a challenge when you wish to bring about some reform or when you wish to initiate something. So be it the 11 years I spent at Jain as its Pro-Vice Chancellor, from 12 years I spent with them from 2009 to 2021 as their Pro-Vice Chancellor, or as the Vice Chancellor of Jagran for a term from 2021 onwards. In both the institutions, I was lucky to have a wonderful team with me at both the institutions. I have always believed that when you are in a leadership position, you understand the sentiments of your team, you understand where your team wants to go, what you want them to do, get them to tell you that we should do that, rather than you telling them that should we do that. Can that come as a result of a consensus of a dialogue we all have? So be it at Jain or be it at Jagran, that was the approach I adopted. And there were wonderful ideas which came from colleagues I was working with. I have reason to believe that if I had worked on those ideas on my own, they would not have been as rich, as profound, as innovative, as creative as what came from those people. So yes, challenges will always be there. If there are no challenges, then you are not confronting the reality, is what I say. If there are no challenges, you are a status quoist person, is what I would believe. So at both my positions at Jain and Jagran, there were challenges, and we collectively looked at those challenges and collectively found answers to take it forward. And I was lucky in both the places, and even now at NITTE, I'm lucky to have at all these three places a team which is willing to take ownership for what has to be done. So it's not that as a head of an institution, I tell the team what has to be done. I'm only there to possibly create an environment for them to give voice to that expectation. I remember when we started off at Jain in 2009, it had just become a deemed to be university. And I was the first Pro-Vice Chancellor of the deemed to be university. And the teething problems that every new institution has, we had to deal with. Our Chancellor kept reminding us there. He kept asking us, reminding us, which I think was a great awakener for all of us. He kept asking us, have we graduated to becoming a university from a clutch of colleges? And this was something constantly we were all asking ourselves as we moved forward. So in that first 12-year journey, every day, every month, every year saw us moving forward, saw us doing better, saw us experimenting. I had taken the responsibility of helping develop the research profile of the university. And within the first few years, Jain earned a name to be an institution to go for if you were serious about quality research. And you have yourself been somebody who experienced that and benefited from that. So that journey, stage by stage, step by step, building on achievements of today and taking them forward tomorrow. And exactly the same thing happened at Jagran. When I joined Jagran, the COVID pandemic was still on. And dealing with starting off in a university where the first phase of the pandemic was over and the second phase was about to begin, and trying to negotiate a university through that phase was an important challenge. And once the vaccination was through and students started coming back to the campus, getting faculty and students geared to a post-pandemic learning environment. Because many of us had got very comfortable with the pandemic style of learning, of online learning. Now, getting back to a blended learning was something which required a lot of effort and a lot of persuasion. That was also the time the national education policy was formally being implemented, what we call NEP 2020. So bringing NEP 2020 in. So these were some of these steps that we took at Jagran, but either at Jagran or at Jain, none of that would ever have been possible if not for the unstinted cooperation, unqualified support, and unending energy of people. Management, faculty, students, other support, all of them, parents, all coming together to work towards the goal of a better quality education. So I would credit all of them for whatever we were able to do.
Yeah, so good to hear that. So I wanted to ask you, you spoke about the NEP 2020. So will the NEP, will the new education policy bring in structural reforms which are required in the Indian education sector? Let's say from the primary level to the university level and of course to research. That's something. There's a lot of expectations about NEP. Whether the implementation would be a success or the number of years it would take probably to implement and get the or to reap the benefits of it.
There is no shadow of doubt in my mind that NEP 2020 represents a very innovative and creative step forward. I was fortunate to be part of various discussions as a consultant when NEP 2020 was being framed. I remember at one of the meetings, the chairman of the NEP committee, Dr. Kasturi Rangan, made an important point. He said, NEP will bring disruption. And if we are not ready for disruption, if we are not ready to face disruption, if we are not ready to take disruption forward, then NEP will not be successful. If we are comfortable with where we are, if we are comfortable with what we are doing, if we are not willing for that shake-up to happen, he reminded us that NEP would not achieve the results it has set out for itself. So if I look at the last 5 years of NEP, 2020 to 2025 now, I think I find very few voices within higher education who are in any way opposed to NEP. There are those political differences that you see across the spectrum, but that's why I'm underscoring the fact, if you speak to people from the higher education world, you see a very little of disquiet with NEP. Of course, there are some areas of debate, but by and large, there is an agreement that NEP is a forward-looking document. But then, as we always say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Most people from 2020 onwards have been telling me NEP is a great idea. But more often than not, we seem to be struggling on issues of what actually implementation of NEP would require of us. Now, while we are wedded to the idea, I'm not too sure we are equally clear about what implementing that idea really involves. If you have another question on that, I'd take that, but I would just make before that 2 points. Number one, implementing NEP is about the flexibility that you provide to the teaching learning process. NEP is about recognizing diversity, recognizing variety, and what we often call in school and college, making learning fun. If NEP does anything, it shifts the focus from teaching to learning. The classroom under NEP 2020 is no longer a space for teaching, it is a zone for learning. Now, are we bringing about that change? I'm not too sure it is happening at the pace it should happen. Point number 2. Implementing NEP 2020 is not about tools and techniques, not about procedures and processes, not about policies and programs, but it is about attitudes and approaches. NEP 2020 is about a change in our way of thinking. If I were to go into my class and tell everybody, today I'm going to teach you, I have not understood NEP 2020. If I go into my classroom and say, today we are all going to have a dialogue on, I have learned my first lesson of NEP 2020, which is classroom is a space of learning where we have a dialogue in which I as a facilitator am learner number 1. Now, this for me is the message of NEP 2020. So in paper, it looks great. But are we making the effort, the commitment which implementing a policy like NEP 2020 requires? There, I think there is a lot which is still to be done. There is a difference between the rhetoric of NEP 2020 and the reality of NEP 2020. There is a difference between the aspiration of NEP 2020 and the activities that we are doing as part of NEP. So I think there we need to have a searching second.
Dr. Shastri, I have with me 2 books. This, I know you're very sure, this is your book, Lal Bahadur Shastri. And this book, you are the author. This book, you help somebody to be the author. This is mine. So I have 2 books with me. I have a small video of Lal Bahadur Shastri to be played to our audience. So I wanted to ask you.
It would be correct to say that I belong to the category of common men.
Prime Minister, you perhaps with your humble origins and your dedication to poverty find this a positive advantage as a leader of the people compared with Pandit Nehru's very cosmopolitan upper-class English education.
It would be correct to say that I belong to the category of common men and common man. And I do find it easy to fight the battle of the common man, to think of taking measures to give relief to him.
Why did you admire Lal Bahadur Shastri so much, or what was that in Lal Bahadur Shastri which created that passion in you about him?
See, when Lal Bahadur Shastri became the Prime Minister, I was just 4 years old. And I have very vague memories of the 1965 conflict that happened between Pakistan and India. And at that point of time, we were in North India. And I still remember the sirens, the blackouts. And I somewhere vaguely remember that slogan, Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, which he came up with. And I very vaguely remember this short person very, very quiet, very, very simple, who led the country and got us to where we were, until, of course, he passed away in Tashkent. So I've always, as a student, later admired Shastri's leadership. And then in 2018, I think it was, or 2017-18, when the publisher approached me and said, we want to get a book out on Lal Bahadur Shastri, will you write that book? I asked them, why did you choose me? Is it because we both have the same surname? They said, no, it's not that. We know that you have worked on leadership in politics. We know that you have written quite extensively on leadership in politics. And you may actually enjoy this project also. I took a week's time and then told them, yes, I would do it. And I started work on the book. It took me nearly 17, 18 months of research to actually go to archives, go to libraries, talk to people, and then come out with this book. And it was a great learning experience for me to understand this man, to understand his simplicity, to understand his humility, to understand his steadfastness, to understand his patience. If I could just mention 2 points. Lal Bahadur Shastri had a great way of getting people to work with them. See, his secretary when he became the Prime Minister was one Mr. Srivastava. And Srivastava writes in a book he has written about his time with Lal Bahadur Shastri, that once Shastri became Prime Minister, he knew Shastri from before, when he was Railway Minister and when he was a minister in Uttar Pradesh. After becoming Prime Minister, Shastri happened to go to Bombay, Mumbai, where Srivastava was working, and unannounced arrived at Srivastava's office and asked Srivastava a simple question. Srivastava ji, and he said it in Hindi. He said, Srivastava ji, kya main aapke saath kaam kar sakta hu? Which translates itself to mean, can I work with you? So it is not that, can you work with me? Can I work with you? Srivastava said, how do I reply to this question? And the Prime Minister of the country is asking me that, can he work with me? And this was not any artificial comment he made. He really meant it. And Srivastava said, yes, whatever you say. So he said, okay, come to Delhi and join my office. Now, this was his style. This was his approach, this disarming way of getting people to be part of his team. In fact, when Jawaharlal Nehru died and the question came who should be the next Prime Minister, there was a minor competition between Morarji Desai and Lal Bahadur Shastri. There was no formal competition because even Desai withdrew from the race later. And the reason why Lal Bahadur Shastri ultimately won was because he had no enemies within the party. Nobody disliked him. He had no enemies at all. Imagine that in politics today, that in your party you have no enemies. And that was the type of person that Lal Bahadur Shastri was. And secondly, I think his integrity. I was fascinated when I read this, that as Prime Minister, Shastri had a personal car, a Fiat. Those days, ambassadors and Fiats were the common cars. He had a Fiat. And believe it or not, Jain, he had taken a bank loan to purchase that Fiat. And he was paying a monthly installment to the bank to pay back the loan for the car he had bought. And this is when he was Prime Minister. When he passed away, a part of that loan was still left to be paid. And his wife paid that remaining part of the loan from the pension she got. See, now that is the levels of integrity that you are talking about. That's the gold standard of integrity that he set during his time, not just as prime minister, but when he came to occupy any position. He once called his secretary when he came to know that his son had taken the car out somewhere for a ride. He asked them to calculate how long was the journey, how many kilometers did they cover, and how much petrol did that involve. And that much money he put into the treasury because his son had used his car without his permission. Now, that's the type of person he was. When he quit the government at one stage, as he was one of the first people to who started this practice of taking moral responsibility when something happens in your ministry. He resigned as railway minister when there was a major rail accident. And that evening, when somebody came to his house to meet him, he was sitting in a room where there was only one light on, and they asked him why. He said, no, now onwards, I have to pay the rent for this electricity consumption, and I have to pay it from my pocket, so I'm being much more careful. Even earlier, I was careful. Now I'm being much more careful because now I have to pay the amount. Now, that is the type of integrity that this man had.